So, first off, hello, my name is Victor Moore. Today we'll be talking to you guys about how climate impacts agriculture. So, as we know, this is a question that may sound quite simple because, as we know, different climates can affect a lot of things differently depending on where you live. That's just how that works. But specifically, we're going to be answering and tackling the question of what these climates do and their effects on not only their crops, but their soil yield, etc. So, we're going to be talking about all that today. So, here we go. So before we get into that, we're going to be talking about the table of contents. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about the types of climates. So firstly, we have our tropical, our dry, our temperate, and continental polar, as well as mountainous climates. So here are the types. Reset it again. We have tropical, dry, temperate, continental polar, and a high mountain climate. So as you can see, not only do these circles look different, which would assume that these climates are different, but they may have some similarities and sometimes, but a lot of them are very different and grow a lot of different things. And let's begin. So firstly, a tropical climate. So I know behind me doesn't look very tropical, but it is still considered a tropical climate because of there's a lot of rainfall and there may not be multiple seasons as well as what they're growing because this is rice. So yeah. So tropical climates are very humid all year round. And as I said, they do not have four seasons. A lot of rainfall and it is very wet, and they have a wet and a dry season. So a wet and a dry season practically is a lot of rainfall and not a lot of rainfall. The humidity stays regardless, but it just depends on the rainfall. So this can affect a lot of the agriculture. Let's say that if Americans had to experience this, a lot of our crops may not survive because we don't have crops that can absorb and or handle as much water as tropical climates can. But they do. So here are some fruits and vegetables that are very resistant to heavy rainfall and possible flooding because that happens a lot as well. So we have bananas, rice, sweet potatoes, pineapples, and a lot of other fruits. The soil from tropical climates is not that great because they do have a lot of rainfall. Therefore, it washes some of that goodness out of it and it floods very easily. So, not the best soil, but stuff can still be grown on it. And if you guys like fruits and vegetables, mostly fruits, some of that stuff comes from that. So, it's not that bad, as you can tell. So, now we're going to be talking about a temperate climate. As Americans, this is what we experience. We have four seasons and a very, very good amount of precipitation. Just like the Three Little Bears, it's not too hot, not too cold, and just right. And I feel like just as this may be a little biased, but I feel like we absolutely are just right. Weather-wise, so the months vary in temperature and precipitation, but because of this, the soil gets introduced to so many different types of weather that it changes and actually is very good for the soil quality. So our soil is very rich and has a lot of yield because of the diversity in weather. So a lot of different crops can grow at a lot of different times, which means we can grow one thing this month, another thing the next. Some people do not have that same luxury. So some fruits and vegetables that can grow, and all of them are carrots, lettuce, spinach, stuff like that. And these can grow year round, mostly depending on the type of weather, but we are very versatile as well as very yielding agriculturally because of these four seasons. Dry. So dry climates have, as you could guess, very little rainfall and a lot of hot air, and it makes it very hard for produce to grow because the conditions are harsh. So just as the tropical climate, as to where it is very wet all the time, you have to have produce or crops or anything that can adjust to not having nearly as much water, but can still thrive. So a few crops that can do that are kale, artichokes, okra, because they are more than okay with dry weather, unlike other crops that cannot survive at all and will die. These plants are very good at having a scarcity of water, so it's very good for them because they can survive and grow. But as you know, the soil is not that great because it is very dry. So although stuff can grow, it makes it very difficult. Now, continental polar. So they are colder. and the precipitation is not nearly as high because it is cold. And it's not dry in the sense of just being the same as a dry climate, but it is very cold and doesn't normally have 4 seasons, but they do have cooler summers. And the food quality is pretty bad because of how cold it is. So it makes it very difficult for more diversity and just food in general because most plants can't survive in the cold. Um, some of this to even plant, you have to get over permafrost, which is just permanent ice that's frozen into the ground. This all really depends on the region as to where you live, but for most of the time, it's very difficult and it doesn't give a lot of yield. Some plants that can grow are like moss, lichens, and algae, but as to where produce, it's not looking too great because not that much yield. So lastly, we have a high mountain climate. So they're usually cooler because they are super high up with very strong winds. Because as you know, the higher you go, you feel the more affects the wind. You feel the more affects the wind, and a little bit more precipitation. Very similar to the continental polar, it is colder. There is low air pressure and low oxygen. And as we know, plants need oxygen as well as humans. So not only to take care of yourself, but to take care of your plants, it's going to be 10 times more difficult because you're not getting nearly as much oxygen as a lowlander like us will get. But that doesn't mean it's not possible. So you can grow some vegetables like lettuce, kale, carrots. It takes it might be a little different from our environment, but it's still doable. And it might be a lot more difficult, but it is very doable. And it's not very yielding. So even though you can grow it, it doesn't make it easy. So from this, we know that there are a lot of different types of climates, and the effects that they have on agriculture vary depending on what they are. But as we know, there are some with more yield than others, and some with no yield, less yield. All these things may affect the produce, but it is still a very diversified agricultural world. So thank you for listening, and here's my works cited page. So yes, thank you.